Greetings, grace and peace to everyone. This is Pastor Keith Collins from Church of the Overcomer in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. I'd like to share a few thoughts with you at this time concerning a young man from our community whose name is Angelo Ford, also known as AJ Ford. My heart is full. My heart is heavy. In August of 2021, at the Academy Park High School, a football game took place, and 3 Sharon Hill Police officers opened fire into a crowd of people leaving that football game. Multiple people were shot, and 8-year-old Fanta Bility was killed. The police officers heard gunshots and fired blindly into the crowd of black people. They were participating in a community event with their families, friends, and loved ones. On May 5th, 2023, the 3 Sharon Hill police officers pled guilty to 10 counts of reckless endangerment and were released with a sentence of probation. They were given signature bail when they were arrested and never posted any funds for bail or served 1 day in prison. It is in the midst of this gross misuse of deadly force that the focus shifted from the officers to 2 young black youths, one who was 15 years old at the time of the incident. They both were accused of engaging in gunplay in a parking lot adjacent to the Academy Park High School, approximately 1.5 blocks away from where the police officers opened fire with their weapons. What were these officers shooting at? What did they believe threatened their lives? Were they in danger of losing their life? The use of deadly force comes with very strict restrictions. And I'm able to speak on these things because I'm a decorated police officer, and I was involved in the shooting within my first 6 months in law enforcement. I'm also a decorated paratrooper with the United States Army. And I chose to wear some of my decorations for this video because I want to impose upon us today that no matter how benevolent we try to be, no matter how beneficent we try to be, no matter how educated and articulate we become, we are engaged in war. It's not a war that we were the protagonists. It's a war that took place hundreds of years ago when the colonial powers and the powers of empire encountered the darker melanated peoples of the earth. And this war still rages, and we are all participants in this conflict. So we must ask ourselves the question, was this use of deadly force warranted? Did it line up with any of their police training? What was the target? What was the threat? And how could they justify unhorsing their weapons and firing blindly into a crowd of innocent black people? Secondly, these 2 young men were charged with first-degree murder by the Delaware County District Attorney known as Jack Stolzheimer. He charged the young men that allegedly were engaging in gunplay with first-degree murder. The police officers were never charged with first-degree murder or second-degree murder or third-degree murder or any other, or even manslaughter. They were never given those charges. These charges were made by a Democrat district attorney, and the end result was the same result that you would have gotten, that you observe around the nation with a so-called Republican prosecutor. The police officers were given a misdemeanor sentence and probation. In other words, they were basically exonerated. This same thing would have happened and happens all the time around the country. So please don't try to engage me in the fact that there's a difference between a Democrat and a Republican. I don't see a difference when it comes to the case of Fanta Bility, the Sharon Hill Police, or AJ Ford. After a modicum of mild protests from one of Jack Stolzheimer's compatriots on the Delaware County Council, he reduced the charges against these young men to attempted homicide. One of these young men accepted a plea deal and I believe agreed to a sentence of 30 months in a state prison. The second young man, who was 15 at the time of this incident, Angelo Ford, known as AJ, a juvenile. AJ chose not to make a deal with the prosecutor, did not plead guilty, and was placed in a juvenile facility halfway across the state and causing great harm to his family in terms of maintaining contact with this young man. AJ would eventually escape from this facility after a worker there intentionally opened the doors to the facility, and AJ simply walked away from the premises. This caused AJ to be a fugitive, quote unquote, for over 1 year. AJ was eventually captured by the authorities and was placed in an adult prison known as George W. Hill Prison within the construct of Delaware County. AJ's trial began June 25, 2024. I, along with about 30 other community representatives, community stakeholders, and other individuals, supporters, attended this trial with the judge, the Honorable G. Michael Green, a former prosecutor, a former district attorney in Delaware County. I, along with others, observed the process from the beginning of the trial on the 25th. I found it unusual that Judge Green brought in other cases. He brought in other prisoners. He brought in other people in custody and heard their pleadings even before he began the trial with AJ. I have not observed this type of behavior in over 40 years of going to court and court support. Also, it should be noted that the courtroom was changed 3 times that morning of the trial. We were given one number, then we went to that room, and that room was told that that was not the room. So there was a merry-go-round, if you please, and that's one of the tactics used by the prosecuting attorneys, and that's really nationwide. But on this day, June 25th, there was a phalanx of police officers, quote-unquote experts, witnesses, as well as others that were just invited to observe the spectacle. There were law students. There were all sorts of special invited guests by the prosecution that were there with notebooks in hand to observe the proceedings. And while I'm there, let me just say this, lest I might forget due to my mind. You know, there are a lot of similarities between the auction house that our ancestors had to endure and the courthouse. The courthouse and the auction house are very similar. The auction house was a place where children were separated from parents, husbands separated from wives, families were torn apart, and so is the courthouse. The auction house was a place of great spectacle and great pain. But at the same time there was pain and spectacle, there was bantering, there was kibitzing, there was laughter, and you see this today when you go into these courtrooms and you see the clerks up front and sitting in front of the judge, and they're texting each other, and they're drinking from their designer water bottles, and they're just having a grand old time while other people's lives are literally on the line. Yes, there's a great similarity between the auction house of our ancestors and the courthouse today. So this spectacle was observed by a very large group of people, extremely large. I guess altogether there might have been about 60 people or more inside the courtroom of Judge Green on the 25th. I was represented, I was very pleased, I should say, to know that AJ was represented by a very competent team of public defenders. 2 young women represented AJ, and they did a fantastic job considering that the state had unlimited resources. When they tell you that when you go into a courtroom and you have the right to representation, what they don't tell you is the state has unlimited funds. You are not going to be given the same amount of funds that this is going to be used to prosecute you. That's another one of the canards of our justice system. What would make our justice system halfway just is if the state spent $100,000 to prosecute you, then they would have to give your defense team $100,000 for you to defend yourself. And public defenders are at a deficit all across the nation. But AJ was represented well, I must say, on my first day of observation on the 25th. He also had a youth advocacy group that was there. This group was known as Youth Sentencing Reentry Project, and they had very competent, very astute people there ready to stand on AJ's behalf if called and if needed. It should be noted on this day of June 25th, 2024, the prosecution brought in several of its quote-unquote star witnesses. These are individuals who had testified earlier or the prosecution believed that they would testify that they saw AJ with the weapon and or saw AJ fire a weapon. But it should be noted, as all of us observed that day on the 25th, some of these individuals were in custody. They were in shackles and chains and bonds, but all to a man said that they never saw AJ with a weapon. They said they never saw AJ fire a weapon, and they didn't even know who AJ Ford was. Now, under any other circumstances, when your star witnesses are not able to identify a person in a crime, then the judge would move for a mistrial, or the defense would move for a verdict of acquittal. And that would be granted because the star witness, the eyewitness is not able to testify. There's no corroboration. But the judge presiding over the case allowed the case to proceed on, and the prosecution proceeded making their case. So it should be noted that these star witnesses did not, in fact, identify AJ, and in fact, at times it became very almost humorous to hear their denial of the questions and the myriad of questions that were asked by the prosecution over and over, because that's a prosecutorial tactic, is to keep talking and talking and talking to get more and more words on the record, to build up the weight of their words, not the weight of evidence, but the weight of their words. The prosecutor, Tanner Rouse, and I believe his assistant's name was Miss Moore, they both injected on the record, for the record, that perhaps these individuals were intimidated because there were so many people in the courtroom. Let me tell you who was in the courtroom. A decorated veteran, an ordained minister for over 45 years, a young lady with an Ivy League college degree from the University of Pennsylvania, senior citizens, community stakeholders, and young people. But the prosecution placed it on the record that perhaps these individuals in support of A.J. Ford were intimidating the star witnesses of the prosecution. We were all taken aback by this fact of this menacing blackness, as it is, this unforgivable blackness, the fact that because you want to exercise your constitutional right, which you have a constitutional right to enter any courtroom in America and observe the proceedings unless it is a sequestered hearing or trial. Everyone has the right to go into a courtroom and observe the process. But your presence there is a threat to those who want to get the business over with quickly as possible. As the great Alton Maddox told us, when they go in that courtroom, they want this to be cut and dry, finished and done with. So our presence was considered a threat by the prosecution. It should also be noted that this courtroom included all of these individuals that were ready and willing to move on behalf of supporting this young man, and that was considered to be a threat by the prosecution. So when the star witnesses failed to testify on behalf of the state, the prosecutor also engaged in an endless display of videos, text messages, and many other forms of hearsay and circumstantial evidence, taking hours out of the day. Numerous video after video. They had a notebook with literally about 6 inches thick of paper, statements, documentation, evidence, as you were, that they were literally flipping through and showing video after video after video. Nothing showing young A.J. Ford engaged in any type of criminalistic behavior. On Friday, June 28th, I was able to resume attending A.J.'s trial. The prosecutor continued to weave a protracted story of how A.J. was the aggressor in this situation in the parking lot, and how A.J. fired 5 rounds at 5 different people, and therefore this justified him being charged with 5 counts of attempted homicide. In this great tale, in this great pronouncement from the prosecutor and his assistant, they relied on hearsay witnesses, they relied on circumstantial evidence, and had no actual factual or legal evidence that A.J. in fact did any of these things. And in a court of law, we are supposed to be judged by the evidence and not by circumstances, and certainly not by hearsay. The defense, to its credit, called for a judgment of acquittal at the end of the resting of the prosecution. The judgment of acquittal was based on the fact that there was a complete lack of evidence proving that A.J. did anything that he was accused of. The judge denied this request. The defense also called for a reduction of the charges against A.J., and the judge denied to reduce the charges. During the trial, one of the young men, this happened on Friday, the 28th of June. During the trial, one of the young men that was supporting A.J. and was a part of our group dozed off. And literally, he may have dozed off for a few moments. This is a young man, a young melanated man with locks, darkly complected young man. And much to our chagrin and much to our startlement, one of the deputies in the courtroom bolted across the courtroom from the front of the courtroom to where we were sitting, approached this young man, put his hands on his shoulders, picked him up, and literally forced him out of the courtroom into the hallway. This was a gross violation of this young man's constitutional rights. It was a gross violation of his person. But again, it goes to the historical unforgivable blackness. This deputy was just waiting for something. He was angered, and felt visceral that these black members of the community were in this courtroom to observe this proceeding. Thankfully and thoughtfully, several members of our group went down to the sheriff's office to file a formal complaint against this deputy. And I do hope that his family will take intense legal action against the Delaware County Sheriff's Department and all other agencies of the Delaware County pertaining to the direction of the court. Perhaps they put this deputy in timeout. He was not allowed. He did not return to the courtroom at the lunch, and they replaced him with a black deputy. But I share this with you to let you understand that even when you're exercising your constitutional rights, you're not safe in America. You're not safe in your home. You're not safe in your car. You're not safe at school. You're not even safe in a courtroom, which is supposed to be a safe space for you to exercise your constitutional rights. It should be noted that when this young man fell asleep temporarily, there were other court officers, in fact, who fell asleep. One directly in front of Judge Green, the other one on the side of Judge Green. These are the people that wear the blue jackets that check you in and advise you to turn your cell phone off. And they're usually senior citizens. And they dozed off as well. But the sheriff's deputy did not accost them. The judge did not say anything to them about dozing off. And in fact, when this deputy did this in full view of the court, the judge said nothing. So that needs to be noted as well. After this young man was accosted by the deputy, we gathered ourselves and gathered our thoughts and gathered our composure and returned to the courtroom. And in closing my remarks, I'd like to share these things. Number one, we must never lose sight of the fact that America's favorite pastime is not baseball, it's not basketball, it's not ice hockey, which, by the way, was invented by black men. It's not any of the traditional sports. If you do any type of study about our ancestors, you know that America's favorite pastime has always been the destruction, the torture, the traumatizing, and the lynching of black bodies. Nothing motivates people more than to traumatize and lynch, or even as Clarence Thomas said, a high-tech lynching of a black body. These courtrooms are very similar to the gulags and concentration camps that the Department of Corrections operates. Those thick concrete walls in the prison, they hide the torture and the abuse that takes place. And those thick concrete walls of the courthouse are intimidating. But not only are they intimidating, but they hide the abuse and the misuse of justice under the color of law that takes place on a daily basis in places like Delaware County, in the so-called North. But as our great leader Malcolm X told us, anything south of Canada is the South. So we are dealing with a situation in which our constitutional rights are not protected. We're dealing with a situation where just our melanin is considered threatening and cause for confrontation. We're dealing with a situation where we are literally participating in America's favorite pastime, which is the lynching of black bodies. A.J. Ford is on trial for the crimes of 3 Sharon Hill police officers. He's not on trial for potential gunplay or firing a weapon. A.J. Ford is on trial because at all costs, these police officers must be exonerated. The blame shift must take place, and this young black man who's not even 18 yet, who is still 17 years old, he must take the weight. And if he is found guilty, and if Judge Green finds him guilty, you can best believe that the FOP lawyers will file a motion to reinstate these police officers. will file a motion to get them their job back, whether it be at Sharon Hill Police Department or somewhere else. This is the scapegoating of a young black teenager who had a troubled life, a troubled youth, and certainly does not deserve to have these horrific adult charges placed upon him for the erroneous and careless and deftly actions of 3 trained police officers who did not know what they were firing at, who violated all the rules of deadly engagement. But according to the laws of the land and the laws of white supremacy, there must be someone to pay. There must be a blame shift that takes place. And if there's any black person or anything like a black person in proximity, they must in turn become the scapegoat for this horrendous act perpetrated by law enforcement. And I'm sharing this with you to say, what do you want me to do, Pastor Keith? Well, what I want us to do is set aside some time, make time, take time off from your schedule, get involved in court support. If you've never done it, you don't know these things unless you go through those metal detectors and sit in these courtrooms. Being there, I'm only giving you a brief snapshot of what took place during the 2 days that I was at this trial. It was horrific. It was traumatizing just to sit there and see all the failings of individuals that were against this young man. And AJ is a thin young man, and he's a young man that has had his own family trauma and family trials, and now his life is literally on the line against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the county of Delaware. I had a good friend of mine who's a retired lawyer, and one day we were having a conversation, and she told me, she said, Pastor Keith, the law is whatever a white man says it is until another white man says something different. And she's a brilliant lawyer, and she told me that, and I had to admit, the law, we think of the law as something coming down from Moses or something coming down from this disconnected, that this is a altruistic thing that sees no color, that sees no gender, that doesn't see race, class, or gender. But that's not true. The law is, and the law has always been interpreted and written by those of the dominant society. And it means whatever they say it means. So if a prosecutor can weave together a long tail of circumstantial and hearsay evidence without any witnesses to corroborate that, that's considered evidence that can be used and found viable in a court of law. I also want to share with you that the court is in effect not a body, but a person. It's not a building, it's a person. It's that person with that robe on. It's that person with that gavel. It's that person. When you hear the prosecutor or the defense attorney say the court, they're talking to a person. Then I'd also like to bring out the fact that we can no longer afford to depend on the media. And that's any media. In Delaware County, we have these, I call them dribble. We have the Delco Times or the Delco Slime. We have the Chester Spirit. We have the Philadelphia Inquirer, all these institutions. And it really was called the Fourth Estate. Now, if you went to a good school, you took a little journalism class in high school like I did, the Fourth Estate, their job is to do what? To represent the position of the state. That's why they're called the Fourth Estate. That's the media. So the notion that what you read in the paper, whether it's about anyone, AJ, myself, or anyone else, if you think that that's the truth, then we're very naive. The media's job is to give you the state agenda, the state propaganda. The journalist's job is to tell you what the media or what the state doesn't want you to know. A true journalist, a true independent journalist will tell you what the state does not want you to know. But when you pick up any of these institutions in Delaware County, Town Talk, et cetera, you're getting nationalism, you're getting white nationalism, you're getting propaganda, and you're getting the state-sponsored agenda. So we must create our own narratives. In addition to participating in court support, we must create our own narratives. We must have our own press conferences. And now that we have technology and the internet and social media, we must use these vehicles not just to post up dances and the food that we consume, but to get the truth of this battle that's taking place and to change the narrative and create our own narrative. We must endure this war, as the scripture tells us, as soldiers. We've been injected into this war. This is not a war that we, as I said earlier, that we declared. It's a war that was declared on us. And as Victor Hugo said, where there is darkness, there will be sin. There will be things that will happen that are not good. But Victor Hugo said the greatest sin is not the person that commits the wrong in the midst of the darkness. The greatest sin is the one that created the darkness. And we live in a country that is based on capitalism, colonialism, empire, and white supremacy. And all of these things create darkness over our lives and the lives of all melanated people and people that desire to be free all over the world. So we must cry loud and spare not, as the prophet Isaiah encouraged us to do. And I encourage you today to be there for A.J. Ford. Be there for your community members. The judge said that A.J. Ford was to be sentenced on July 2nd. That's tomorrow. I'm making this video on July 1st. But we just found out today, Monday, July 1st, that the date has been changed again to July 9th. July 9th with Judge G. Michael Green is the sentencing. Now, we must continue to be diligent because this is another prosecutorial tactic of changing dates, times, and courtrooms. But if you can, in fact, clear your schedule for July 9th, 2024, to Judge G. Michael Green's courtroom, please be there with us in support of A.J. Ford. Thank you so much for your time and your consideration.